In a
Beauty of
world that
Hollywood,
often forgets its
21 to
heroes,
49.
today we remember one
Some
who
people
never
leave a
forgot
room
us.
and you notice the quiet. Others leave a career and you notice the quiet for years. Bill Gaither belongs to the second kind, the rarer kind, and his stepping away from all public appearances didn't register like a retirement announcement. It registered like a frequency dropping out of a signal you had stopped noticing precisely because it had always been there. Gospel music didn't just lose a performer when that brief statement landed. It lost the organizing principle around which an entire community had quietly arranged itself for decades. And the difference between those two things is something the genre is still working out how to absorb. Nobody saw it coming, and that's what made it land so hard. The gospel community had grown accustomed to a rhythm built partly around his presence, a kind of background assurance that operated quietly but constantly. Church services, revival events, Southern gospel festivals, and homecoming gatherings all carried his imprint in one way or another. Fans who had followed him across decades weren't just attached to his catalog of recordings or his name on a concert poster. They were attached to the feeling those songs delivered, the specific sense that even in the worst seasons of a person's life, someone had already written a melody for exactly that kind of pain. Bill had delivered that melody, reliably and without pretension, with a warmth that cameras somehow never diluted, no matter how many years passed between a listener's first time hearing him and their last. What makes his departure unusual and worth sitting with is how quietly it arrived. There was no farewell tour announced months in advance, no drawn-out media cycle filled with tribute concerts and emotional retrospectives leading gradually toward a final goodbye. His official team released a brief statement, almost startling in its simplicity, confirming that Bill would be withdrawing from all public engagements immediately, with no additional details offered and no timeline suggested. Fans read those words twice, then a third time, searching for any phrasing that might soften the blow or hint at a temporary rest. None was there. The stillness that followed settled over the gospel community the way stillness only does when something genuinely irreplaceable walks out the door. The responses came quickly and without restraint. Artists who had shared stages with him spoke openly about what his presence had meant, not as professional courtesy, but with the kind of raw gratitude that surfaces when someone realizes they may have taken a mentor for granted for far too long. Bill had never led through instruction alone. He led through the consistency of showing up, through the standard he quietly held himself to, through the way he treated every performance, as though the person sitting furthest from the stage deserved the same quality of experience as anyone in the front row. The fans matched that outpouring with their own stories, and what was striking about those stories was how specific they were. People described his music the way others describe medicine, something they reached for in the dark because it worked when nothing else did. Funerals where one of his hymns carried a family through grief too heavy to move through alone. Weddings where a song he wrote became the detail the couple recalled most clearly years later, when everything else about the day had blurred. Sunday morning services, where his voice through a speaker became, for someone sitting alone in a back pew, the only remaining tether to faith they hadn't yet let go of. That is not the legacy of a performer. That is the legacy of someone who understood that gospel music was never built for stages. It was built for the private moments no one else witnesses, and that is where it has always done its deepest work. He didn't arrive at the top of the genre with a sudden crossover hit or a moment that spread faster than it could be explained. The ascent was steady and deliberate, rooted in hard work and a genuine conviction that the message mattered far more than the messenger. From modest beginnings, he grew into a figure recognized across the full spectrum of Christian music. A songwriter, a performer, a producer, and a curator of the kind of community that doesn't form by accident. The songs he released weren't products engineered to chase a market. They were attempts, sincere and consistently executed, to give people language for experiences they couldn't otherwise name. And again, they succeeded. The Gaither Homecoming series became something that had no real precedent, a gathering space where legends of Southern gospel and contemporary Christian music shared the same stage, bridging generational gaps in the religion and music space that might otherwise have quietly widened until they couldn't be crossed at all. His concerts weren't concerts in the conventional sense. They were reunions, carrying all the warmth and the occasional unexpected tears that word has always implied. People didn't just attend them, they returned to them year after year, the way you return to a place that has never once disappointed you. What the audience rarely saw is the weight that decades of selfless service quietly accumulate in the background of a person's life. Smiling through exhaustion becomes second nature when you've trained yourself to do it long enough. His decision to step back was not a failure of will. It was an act of self-awareness that many people in similar positions never manage to arrive at, while there's still time to make good use of it. Knowing when to stop, particularly when the world around you is not prepared to let you, takes a different kind of strength than showing up ever did. And he demonstrated both kinds across his career. The farewell message his team released carried a clarity that cut through all the noise of speculation and grief. Bill made clear that gospel music had never belonged to any single voice, including his own, and that its power was never rooted in the individual doing the delivering. He described it as something more like a river, continuous and self-sustaining, carried forward by whoever is willing to step into it next. He asked the community he had spent his life building to keep believing, to keep finding hope in the music, and above all to keep loving one another. Coming from someone with his body of work and his lifetime of earned credibility behind him, those words functioned as something closer to a commission, a transfer of responsibility to every musician and listener who had ever been shaped by what he created. The gospel world moves differently now, without him at its center. But differently does not mean diminished. New voices are filling spaces he once occupied, carrying his influence forward, whether or not they can trace it directly back to him. Churches still open, hymnals containing songs he wrote. Families still reach for his recordings at the most significant moments of their shared lives, the celebrations and the losses equally. The presence may have receded from public view, but the work remains fully active, doing exactly what it was always designed to do. His story belongs in the rarer category of a life genuinely and fully well spent. A man who found what he was made for, committed to it without chasing recognition, affected more people than he probably ever stopped to count, and then had the wisdom to recognize when the right moment to rest had finally arrived. Every hymn still sung, every younger voice shaped by the standard he held, every faith that remained steadier because of a melody written in a quiet room somewhere years ago, all of that is the answer to what a life fully given to something larger than oneself actually looks like. It sounds exactly like him. And in gospel music, that kind of sound never disappears. It gets passed forward, one voice at a time, until the river he described carries it somewhere, neither he nor anyone listening right now can yet imagine.